Hi, I'm Lisa Boreen Miller, your host for the Intentional Creators Summit, where we explore what it takes to truly thrive as a creator making a positive impact in the world. Today, I am having a conversation with Sara Roach Lewis. Sara teaches ambitious women the strategies they need to claim their confidence, scale their businesses, and double their revenues. With decades of business experience as a feminist business strategist, Sara has supported thousands of women to shed society's expectations and create new pathways for success. After her dream job left her burnt out, Sara made a radical shift by putting her own needs at the top of her priority list. The strategies she employed led to a thriving coaching practice with revenues that double each year and a happy heart, as well as a healthy 80-pound weight loss. A lifelong learner, Sara holds a degree in psychology and is a certified life coach with diplomas in business administration and journalism, as well as alternative dispute resolution from the University of Prince Edward Island. Sara believes that gender equality will solve all of the world's problems and that by advancing women, we build a better world for everyone. She Rules, What You Didn't Know Is Holding You Back in Business is Sara's first book. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, Sara. I'd like to welcome you to the Intentional Creator Summit. I'm so glad that you're here and so looking forward to speaking with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
I was hoping you could start by filling us all in a little bit about your journey as an entrepreneur.
Oh, sure. My journey as an entrepreneur is really one that only started about 5 years ago. So before that, I worked for a feminist organization. I spent most of my career working in the not-for-profit sector. And about 6 years ago, I decided that burnout was real. And as much as I love my job and really felt such great privilege to be able to work, to be paid to be a feminist, I realized that I needed to do something different. And so I went and worked with a startup, a small startup. And then I realized that I needed to do it myself. One of the questions was, can I work for someone else after having been a leader for a long time? And the answer was no. No, not at all. I'm fairly unmanageable, and relatively unemployable at this point. So I became an entrepreneur.
That's that's a great story. So how did you decide what focus your business would have, what you'd be doing? How did all of that develop for you?
Well, a bit of an interesting story, really, because again, as I said, I worked for a not-for-profit. And when I was making that painful decision to leave, it took me about a year and a half. And I was really thinking about what parts of this job do I love so much? What parts of this job are really not what I want to be doing anymore? And so what I realized in that inquiry that I was doing with myself is that gender equality is what fires me up. And I believe that gender equality can solve all of the world's problems. And so once I recognized that, I realized, oh, there are a million entry points into that. I can choose to do something different. And the first year, and so I started my business, um, more, I think, as a default, like, than anything else. It's like, well, I don't wanna do this anymore. I don't wanna do this. I don't wanna go work for government. I guess I'll start my own business, and I'll do some consulting. Um, and so my first year in business, I knew that I wanted to do kind of coaching and consulting, and it was very much in line with what I had done in my old job. So I started with I took a coaching certification program out of the US. And I often characterize that first year that I was in business as my year-long crisis of confidence. And so I really struggled with, what does someone who spent all those years working in a not-for-profit, what do I have to bring to the business world? And it really took me about a year to figure that out.
What did you figure out from that time? What did you learn that has changed kind of the way that you're operating now?
I realized that I had a ton of skills from that old world that I was able to bring to the business world. And part of those are very tangible, like actually running a small not for profit, that when I became ED or when I became part of the management team, our revenues were about $200,000 a year, over a period of probably 6 or 7 years. We grew those to almost 900,000. So there's a whole lot of operational things, HR and administration and all of those kinds of things are similar. Hardcore project management skills and project coordination, that they all really align with supporting business owners in the planning and operations of their business. The other thing that I realized was that deep understanding of women's experience. So I've worked with thousands of women on dozens of different projects, and I've worked with women who were incarcerated. I spent a lot of time working on projects supporting. We did a community response to poverty. It was a 3-year project, and I spent a lot of time working on that project. We had this amazing research team that included folks from the university and a dozen subject matter experts. So 12 women who had lived experience with poverty. So I worked with a lot with women who experienced significant challenges in their life. I worked a lot with women who were working in traditionally male occupations, so trades and technology, fishing, farming, business, politics. And so I understand both the lives of women from that personal level, but I also spent, almost 10 years um, really involved with public policy and research and understanding what are those systemic and structural barriers that women face in the world. And so all of that is what I brought to my business. And as a result of all of that, I generally work with women, not always, but my programs are designed to support women to make big changes in their business, in particular around that planning piece. So, how do you create a plan and the action attached to it to double your revenues in a year?
Amazing. I think there's a few things we could talk about after hearing, your story and what you're sharing. One of them is I think it'd be great to hear a little bit more about your book and some of the reasons why you're focused on women and some of the inequalities that are out there, which I think many people might be quite surprised by how drastic the numbers actually are. So that's the first thing. And then after that, I'd love to just connect that back to creators and some of the things that women may have in common with just creators in general in terms of similarities in the earning sense. So
Sure, I would love to chat about both of those things. So, my book is called She Rules What You Didn't Know Is Holding You Back in Business. And it really is for anyone who wants to read it. I very specifically wrote a book about women, again, going back to that's where my experience is. And that's where I shine, is making all of those connections for folks. It's funny, particularly when we look at the experience of women in business. The number of women owned businesses has quadrupled in the last 40 years. Women have really embraced entrepreneurship. And yet, one of the things that I continue to hear from my clients over and over again is, that they don't always feel comfortable in their role as business owner or entrepreneur, even though it's their business. And so, we hear all the time about imposter syndrome and confidence as being such a significant challenge. And so I started thinking about that when I was writing my book. And what I realized is, I'm a business strategist. And so I love strategy. And what I realized was the rules of business are written by men, inspired by military strategy, and generally supported by a woman at home doing everything else. And boom, well, that's why it doesn't always feel like it works for women. And if we think about The Art of War by Sun Tzu, written in the 5th century BC, is widely considered the Bible of business strategy. And it is military strategy. And when we make that connection, what I talk about in the book is that, frankly, military strategy does not work as a foundation for our business anymore. And I would argue for anyone. I mean, it is really based on, command and control and beat the competition and finite resources. And we know that that's not, business doesn't have to be about that. And so when I think about creators, I have like such a pleasure. This year and last year, I have the joy of working with creators here on Prince Edward Island, where I live. Creative PEI, one of the sector council here, and their role is to help. See if I can get it right because it's a great tagline. They support increasing the incomes and outcomes of creative entrepreneurs. So I have been teaching a creative entrepreneurship training program both last year and this year, and it's a real joy. It is really so fun to work with creatives and help them understand the business side of their business.
Yes, I mean, I think that's such an amazing thing. And for those of you that are watching, I think one of the funnest aspects of connecting with Sarah was not realizing that she was doing this work, right? So it was a surprise when we connected to learn that you actually had this passion for working with creators as well. And I'd love to chat more about what it is about creators that excites you and what you're finding in working with them. Are you finding um, that there's any commonalities in terms of how they enter the market and some of the challenges they're facing?
I love creative people. And it's funny, I don't necessarily resonate that way myself. I wrote a book. uh, but, to so I've been surrounded by creatives. My mom, was both one of the first women to fish with my dad as a commercial fisherman. So she was a real trailblazer in that way, but she's also a beautiful artist. And she's just one of those people who can put her hand to anything. And when you look around my house, especially at Christmas, it's like the arc of my mother's visual art career. Um,
I
and
love that.
so I
That's
just I think it's really inspiring that people can create beautiful things from nothing. And I love live music. Like when I think about the creative sector being, so broad, and I go to the same folk music festival. I go to the Stan Rogers Folk Festival in Canso, Nova Scotia every year for more than 20 years. And I love it so much. And I will say loud and clear, like I'm probably about a half a centimeter away from being tone deaf. So I will say I'm a good listener. Like that's my contribution to the music scene is I'm a really good listener.
that is such an important contribution.
Right? It
It
really is.
really is.
And I think music and art and like whatever it is, it fills your soul. And I think about Stanfest as that's live music hits the reset button on my soul. And so the creative sector, whatever that is, that's what I love about it, is it allows people to see beauty in the world, and we need that.
I agree. I agree. So, when you're working with in your program, you have a lot of different types of creators. One of the things that I'm interested in talking a little bit about is this idea that creators are natural risk takers in a way. They're constantly, like you said, creating something from nothing, which is basically what we do in business as well. So,
100%.
in my mind, they're actually very similar processes, and yet it can be really difficult for someone stepping in from an artistic background to think about themselves as an entrepreneur.
Yes, and that is something that I see over and over in both. I mean, I work with a lot of people in my coaching practice who would be in my focus is the service-based businesses. So there's a lot of people in that realm that are certainly part of that creative sector as well. When I think specifically about these last 2 years of, um, probably more than 50 people going artists going through those 2 trainings, that one of the challenges is some of those narratives, right? We have the myth of the starving artist, and we also have a lot of messages in our head and messages that we hear that, those things don't mix, right? Like, art and money don't mix. And I don't think that that needs to be the case. And I think that, um, also, unfortunately, depending on the area of the creative sector that you're in, we don't always value the art the way that we should. So I think that there's both sometimes that internal challenge that creatives have, and then it is reinforced by sort of some of those external pressures that, well, why would I spend, you know, I'm thinking about one woman who's in my program right now, and she's making beautiful hand knit sweaters that are a luxury item. So why am I going to spend hundreds of dollars on this hand knit sweater when I can go to Walmart and buy a sweater? So part of that is understanding and figuring out, how do we place value on our work?
Mhm. Yes, and one of the things that you mentioned in your book was around vision and values. And I know you're talking about values in a different way, but I think that when we think about the world that we want to create and the work that we do in the world, where we spend our money is influenced a lot of the time by our values. And so that can be from a place of, what am I going to put my time into to work on? Because that's a driving value that I have, which might influence your production. And then what am I going to put my money into as a purchaser that supports the people, the world, the communities that I want to support? So, right.
Well, and it's so true, right? Because, well, we were having such an interesting conversation in our group call last week, and I have been thinking about it for 6 days now, and I can't wait to go back and talk more. So part of what I teach in the creative entrepreneurship training is around doing market research to figure out what the problem is that your customer has, and then your business provides that solution. And one of them last week, she's an artist. She's a brilliant visual artist, and her name is Renee Laprise, and everyone should go check her out. And so I actually took home one of her paintings last week, and anyway, it was super exciting. So Renee was talking in our class about, well, what problem am I solving for my customers? And so we kind of chewed around on that a bit and maybe flipped it around to, like, what is the need that my customers have? And I think, it's so interesting when you talk about, like, your values and what is it that you're bringing in your work. And so part of what I've been thinking about and part of what I've been noodling on is like on the front end, you think, well, there's not, what problem is art solving? Well, there's certainly needs that it's solving, but I actually think there's problems too. And I think back to my own trajectory as someone who loves art in particular, about probably 10 years ago now, when I first started working at Women's Network, the feminist organization I worked for. I went to one of my colleagues' house one time to write a proposal. And she is another brilliant artist, and her partner is a potter. And so their house was full of beautiful art because, of course, they did trades with their friends and it's something that they valued. So they bought lots of. And I walked into this country home, kind of the same as mine. And I just looked around and I thought, this is incredible. This is what I want my house to look like. I want to be surrounded by this beauty. And all these years later, I don't have enough wall space. And so we had to be like juggling things around to put Renee's painting in. And so I've been thinking about this in terms of like the problems that we solve. And, for me, if I go back to that, there was something about the kind of person I wanted to be. And the kind of person I wanted to be was one who was surrounded by local, beautiful, handmade things.
I know what you're talking about around that struggle where creators have a hard time sometimes thinking about their work as there's two parts to the work, I should say. There's the part of the work when you're a creator that's very much for you because it's an expression of something you need to express, whether you would say that as your soul, your calling, or because it's something you feel compelled to do as a creator. And then there's this other aspect of the work where you have to think about it more as a product if you're thinking about having a business. And that's the part that gets a bit trickier. And that's where I think, like you said, people can have a really hard time thinking, what problem do I solve? And I've had this conversation as well. But when you see it as an expression from someone's soul, that's their calling, it has a way of holding culture, of expressing something, a truth, or tapping into an emotion. And that can be whether you're a musician, a writer, or a crafts person, or a painter. But it can be a transformative experience. It's often hard to put into words and often hard to put a value on. So,
And yet we need to put a value on it.
mhm,
And so I think that's the thing that I'm also equally as excited about is helping people see that money's not gross. There's definitely some challenges for sure. Like, we have all kinds of great conversations both, at home and in these groups that I run around capitalism and, contributing to capitalism and all of those sorts of things. And it's like I really have landed on that's the system we have. And it's definitely not perfect or anywhere close to it. Yet my my strategy has always been to work within systems to change them.
right.
And so for me, it is important that people who don't necessarily see themselves in a capitalistic system can learn the tools and the skills that they need to dip their toes in there. And so one of the things that I spent a lot of time talking to creatives about, particularly in these courses that I was running and that I'm running, is not seeing yourself as an entrepreneur. And I get it. I grew up in a fishing family, and we can trace our fishing roots 16 generations, like way back to France. And so that identity as a fisherman is so strong that I was in business for a few years before I realized I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. It never occurred to me. Grew up in a fishing family. And so I know that that creative and artistic identity is so strong in that same way that it is hard to kind of peel back those layers and look at it and go, oh, actually, I am also an entrepreneur. I am also a business owner here. And what I often say to folks is anyone giving you a T4 if you're in Canada? Is anyone giving you a T4? No? Then you are a business owner. You can call yourself, part of the gig economy. You can call yourself an artist. You can call yourself a solopreneur. You can call yourself whatever. But unless somebody's giving you a T4 for your work, then you are a sole proprietor or whatever you want to call it. And it is going to do nothing but benefit you to understand how to make that work for you.
Mhm. I've been thinking about that since I heard you say it the first time, and I think that's such a great example. So, if somebody's, let's say, in your program or came to you and had this realization that, okay, I need to make some changes here. My business is not sustainable. Um, I really need to turn things around. Where would you recommend they start in terms of valuing their work, maybe creating a plan? What would you have them do?
The first thing that I would have folks do is some of that internal work, exactly what you just started talking about. So, my jam is planning. And that's what I love more than, lots of other things and that's what I'm really good at. So what I would talk to people about are the different stages of planning. And the very first stage that we look at is, what is your vision? So I would say, take some time. Where do you want to be 10 years from now? And so looking at that very big picture, pulling it back to like, okay, so 10 years from now, do you have kids? How old are your kids going to be? I always find that so wild. Mine are 14 and 18. So when I think 10 years out, they're likely not going to be living with me anymore. um, so, thinking about your vision for your life before you even start thinking about your business. Um, often I will ask, are you building something when you think about your business? So first it's your life. Where do you want to see yourself in 10 years from now? We think about, someone depending on what your creative endeavor is, it may be hard on your body. And you may be thinking, I don't know if I want to do this for more than 10 more years. So that's first. Then we vision to, so your business, what do you want to see for your business in 10 years? Sometimes like there's a difference. Are you growing something to sell? Are you wanting to look at, say creating a production line that you are producing, but also you're building something that you might like to sell. So that's different. And then still in the visioning is financial. So how much money would you like to make? So we're looking at the big picture, longer term, but then let's look at the next 12 months. How much money would you like to make in the next 12 months? We're not asking you how you're going to figure that out, but we're going to ask you in that visioning. So then when we look at that, then we're going to pull that back to, so now let's create a plan. You know what it is that you want. You've got your North Star. You've got your, where it is that you're going. So now let's make a plan to figure out how to make that happen. And the way that I like to plan and teach people to plan is in 90-day chunks. So, as small business owners, part of the joy of being a small business owner, an entrepreneur, creator, is that you can be nimble and that you want to have the ability to iterate, to make some decisions. And so, what that looks like is doing a 90-day plan. So, you may look at, well, you know what, over these next 12 months, I want to do this thing. And in the first 90 days, and I wanted to, increase my revenues by $40,000, let's say. And so in this first quarter, you do some brainstorming, right? So we're going to brainstorm what are all the things that you could do in order to hit that goal. Then we're going to make some really hard decisions because sometimes that also feels like killing ideas, like that agonizing of like, what process am I going to do? But we know that that focus is super important. So we are going to really look at what of all of those ideas that you have is what you need to do right now to drive the greatest growth to getting you toward that goal that you set for yourself. So once we decide on that plan, both of those things are super easy and they don't actually take long. Then you break it down to like, so what am I going to do in the next 2 weeks to hit that goal? And then you just do it. That's where the rubber hits the road.
Right.
You can do all the strategy and planning. It doesn't take long. The action is where the magic happens.
One of the parts I wanted to ask you more about was the part where people have to decide on what they're going to earn. Because I think in that part, do you find that people hit resistance where it's hard for them to say, "Oh, I could earn this much"? Or do you find that it's that they can easily imagine themselves making what they need to make?
It's often hard for people to do that. And so I think there's a few different ways that we can bell that cat. So sometimes, especially for creatives, is needing to look at um like sometimes we just want to get to what are your expenses? What do you need to make? I mean, a great example is I was talking to a woman today, actually, brilliant musician, really extraordinary. And she knows what her monthly expenses are. She knows how much she makes right now. And she would like to make the transition from being a touring musician to one who is able to stay home. So she's exploring an option that will allow her to do that. And so, in order to figure out how much money you want to make, you can do it from that way. You can look at, um, here are my monthly expenses. Obviously, you want to make more than your monthly expenses because you have to be thinking about your business expenses as well. But that's a nice foundation to look at. At the bare minimum, this is what I'd like to make. So that's one way of doing it. The other way is like you can just put a number out into the world and say, like, I want to make, and here's one that I would encourage. I don't know what the numbers are for men, but 86% of women owned businesses make less than $100,000 a year. And I'll tell you right now, that is the hardest stage of business. And it is hard because you have to do everything yourself. And the money that's coming in the door, you need that money. You need to pay your rent. You need to pay your mortgage. You need to buy food. And so you end up not doing things that are in your zone of genius. You not end up doing the things that you're not uniquely talented to do because you're caught in this trap of needing to use all of the revenues that are coming in the door to sustain yourself. So, one of the things I would really encourage you to do is to just, hit that number and to say like, actually, I want to build a business that is sustainable and allows me to do the things that I love to do. And in order to do that, it means I need to make enough money to pay other people to do the stuff I don't like to do.
And Sarah, how much of this do you think has to do with mindset and belief and worthiness? Could you talk a little bit about that relationship and earning potential?
Oh, so much, so much. um, yeah. And And the great thing about that is that it is like we can shift our mindset. Like it it's so fantastic. I had already referenced that like starving artist mentality. We do not need to have that. Um and so much of the mindset, it really comes back to that family of origin and what are those stories that we were told about money. And I think about my own family. We just didn't talk about money. Like it was just not something that was ever discussed. And then every now and again, because of course there's quite a seasonality to the fishing world. Long about now, actually. Sort of April is a rough month in a fishing family. And so, every now and again there would be this bubbling up. And there would be this explosion of anger. My husband and I have been together for, 100 years, and we started dating when we were 21. And so we really grew up together in many ways when you're with someone for in your early 20s. And his family of origin, money also fishing family, money is super stressful, like so stressful. So when your body has all of these memories of money being attached to fights and anger and, all of these things, that in and of itself makes it challenging. And then we're going to add on that layer of um, needing to figure out how to place value on our own creative work. Ugh, like, let's talk about things that are hard.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
So mindset is huge. And the great thing is it is absolutely one of those things that you can shift and change and grow. And I believe that the only antidote to a lack of confidence is action.
Mm.
And that's where this learning comes in. And that's why what you're doing with this whole series is so important, because what we know is that sometimes people's challenges around confidence are legit because they need to learn more. And you think about your own creative practice, whenever that is. In those early days, you weren't great, but you just kept doing it until you honed your skills. And so that's the same thing that you need to do if you're struggling with money mindset, finding your value, all of those things, is you apply those same skills that you already know how to do. You start, it might be messy, it might not look in the world what it looks like in your mind, just like your art practice, but the more you work on it, the better it will be and the easier it will become.
I think that's really powerful advice. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for your words about the summit. I really appreciate that.
Oh, it's so great. Yeah.
Thank you. One last idea I wanted to touch on something I read in your book. Um, I'm going to read it. It's just a short sentence, but you said in your book, you will care less about the opinions of others when you find a community of women who do. And I read that and I thought that was such a powerful statement and something that I could really connect with. Um, and my hope with this summit is that people are able to start finding a community of mentors and peers that are they know are in their corner, because I think what you touch on there is so true and valuable. So, did you want to share about that importance of community and what it's meant for you?
Oh, I just think community is so important. And I think I've done so many things when it comes to bringing people together, whether it's like national conferences, or I have this really great, amazing group that I run now with the leaders in the arts and culture. There's about 20 leaders in the arts and culture sector here on Prince Edward Island. And it's called the Living Lab. And it actually came as a result of COVID. So I was doing some teaching on like leadership training in the arts and culture sector. COVID hit, and we only had 1 day of training left. And this was in March of 2020. And so I thought, who knows when we're going to be able to meet in person again? And so I brought everyone online again with Creative PEI with my colleagues there. And community is so important for those folks in particular. At that time, we're talking about people who were running festivals and events and theaters and, hosting music awards. And every week we would come together and someone else would say, we've made the difficult decision to cancel our festival. And it makes me teary just thinking about it now, like 2 years later. and how important that community was for them, because we tend to think that these are folks in a small town, a small community, competing for limited resources, competing for the same project funding, competing for the same audience members. And there was so much um, uh, camaraderie and shared experience. And, people would cry. And on this weird Zoom box in the early days, we figured out that we could have community and that we could support each other through incredibly difficult times, even though we couldn't gather in person. So I think what you're doing here is similar to that, that we don't have to gather in person, but man, when we find those communities of people with shared interests and shared values, um, that collaboration comes together and community is so beautiful. And I just believe with all of me that all you need to do is create the safest space that you possibly can, invite people to that, and they bring the magic.
Mhm. Yes, they sure do. They do. Thank you, Sarah. You brought such magic today to our conversation. And I know you'll ignite that spark of confidence and clarity for so many people who are watching. So thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's some of my most favorite conversations. It's such a joy.
It is such a joy. And before we sign off, I know that you've got even more to give. So you've got this incredible book, She Rules, that's out, which I'd love for you to let people know where they can find it. And then you've got another incredible offering that you're generously giving for free that will help people with that 90-day plan that you mentioned.
Yes. So I'm happy to share both of those with you, Lisa. So folks can go to sherules.biz, and there you can download for free. Um, I don't know, a bunch of chapters of the book. You're supposed to give away one chapter, but I couldn't stop at one. So you can download free chapters of the book, or you can just find out where you can order. You can order it on Amazon. It just brings you to the link really easily. Um, but when we were talking about, what I could share with your audience, I am really excited to give the 90 for 90 that I was talking about a little bit ago. So it's called 90 for 90, 90 minutes to plan the next 90 days in your business. And it is really so worth it to take that time, sit down with me and, walk through this. It's a video and there's a workbook attached to it as well. So you'll end up with a one-page canvas that you can put on your wall. It's like, that's my 90-day plan for the next 90 days. That's what I'm focusing on. And it will also generate emails every 2 weeks, as I talked about, like sort of that 2 week sprint review. So you kind of look at what do I need to do in the next 2 weeks to drive my goals forward. I'll show up in your inbox every 2 weeks to see how you're doing.
That's great. I think that's going to be exactly the thing that is going to help some people move forward and start meeting the goals that they set for themselves, or maybe even reaching for bigger goals than they might have set before. So I will send that out with this video so everyone will have access to it. So thank you, Sarah, so much for being here. It's been wonderful to have you. And please connect with Sarah for the 90-day plan and check out the book.
Wonderful. Well, this has been such a joy, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sarah. We'll talk to you soon.